Welcome to another episode of Athens and Jerusalem. Let's begin where we can't escape. Let's begin with Logos.
Now, I would say that this openness, this being in the world, this referring to the world, to objects in the world, what I would like to call self-transcendence, this is disappearing as soon as you project a human being into a lower dimension than its own dimension.
Point of the V goes up to the nuclear explosion that created it.
Tell me this, Dr. Oppenheimer. Do you ever become frightened at what you're finding out here in this area that can't be measured in either time or space?
You see, that's a real point.
Do not be afraid. Open your hearts, open up your hearts.
Open up your hearts to Athens and Jerusalem. The infants of our culture, united, independent, polarized, and even bloody. Athens, the cradle of wisdom and rationality. Jerusalem, the cradle of faith and spirituality. In this podcast, we look at reunion. Could reason be more than modern secular skepticism? And could spirituality be more than belief? So, welcome to this third episode of Athens and Jerusalem. Last time we discussed the one and the many. Mostly we focus on Athens. I just wondering, try to focus more on Jerusalem this time. And maybe we should start with this question. Is it possible to listen to Logos and experience God? What do you think, Stephen?
Huge question, of course. One thing I would start with is when we talk about God or Logos, we should admit up front that we don't know what we're talking about, in the sense that we don't have any direct access to this thing to which we have ascribed, to which we have assigned this noun that has this grammatical position in our language, and then we all go around talking as though we know what we're talking about when we talk about God or Logos. And maybe for the purposes of this conversation, we'll kind of talk about God and Logos as equivalent ideas. But the reality is we also don't have direct access to the laws of physics either. And so there are a lot of things we don't have direct access to. So we have to talk about it through inference or indirectly. But the thing with ideas about God or Logos, these metaphysical absolutes, is that there are certain individuals in history who come along and say, I know this thing for sure. You're going to have to trust me. And I'm referring to the prophets, but also, lots of individuals, besides prophets, also have a sense of absolute certainty that I know this thing is true. So what about those of us who don't have that sense of inner certainty? What can we do about it? What's the response to that, given that we have no direct access to it? And I can imagine there's two basic responses to it. One would be, well, look for some kind of indirect evidence in the world, in our own lives, in our collective experience as human beings. And the other possibility would be try out the idea, try it on for size, and see if in the doing, in the acting through this idea, acting as though that idea were true, it leads somewhere unexpected, somewhere that otherwise we wouldn't have guessed if we were just kind of sitting in our armchair thinking about the idea in a more kind of abstract way. And so that's what I think about initially when I think about, how do we even address this question of the metaphysical absolute of things, which may or may not, provide a useful point of unity for the human race, because that would be one of the directions we could go. And there's a lot of directions, obviously, we can take this conversation. One direction would be to say, well, what is the indirect evidence, or is there indirect evidence to this claim of there being a single unifying reality behind the world of appearances? Can we see it? Is it written in the stars? You know, is it graven in the rocks? You know, is it in some way visible to us in a tangible way, from which we can infer that there is this underlying reality of things? But then secondly, in terms of, you know, trying out the idea, we can look at it in terms of how does this affect us personally? You know, what does it mean when we orient ourselves to a divine reality, a logos or a God? What does it mean when we worship something? What does it mean to worship something? I hope we can have a side, at least a piece of our conversation about that, because there isn't, you know, sort of consensus agreement even on what it means to worship something. And then thirdly, looking at this idea from the perspective of not individually, but collectively, you know, what is the pragmatic benefit or consequence of aligning ourselves collectively, societally, around, say, a single idea? We can talk about, for instance, whether a polytheistic kind of orientation is more or less likely to produce, you know, a large unity across, say, a civilization, or across, say, like the global civilization, which is emerging. Is it pragmatically easier to establish that on a, say, polytheistic foundation, or on a monotheistic foundation, or on an atheistic foundation? That's another really interesting direction we can take things. But
so maybe we should try to also, I think, first of all, this question about how to experience something divine is I think that's very interesting, and I think you said is that we could do it by experiences, or we could do it by practices.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there is maybe a third way, and that is our inner self, or our ability to think logical about it all. I mean, all, and this is I think was so. If I should try to say that if we should have this possibility of listening to the divine true logos, that is to actually start with our inner self and trying to just listening what our own soul tells us.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, this is again Platonic, but Platonistic maybe. Socrates, one of the reasons why he died, or he was judged to die, he offending the gods.
Mm-hmm.
And often we talk about this. We went from mythos into logos with Socrates and the Platonic dialogues, but that doesn't mean that we went from believing in gods to not believing in gods. On the contrary, Plato and Socrates still believed in God, but they believed in what they understood as a logical divinity. And that was divinity that was eternal, unchangeable, perfect. All these entities that we connect to, what they connect to logos, of course, and also to what is good and what is beauty. So I would say that their logical experience, or the logical thinking on this idea of God, made them into monotheists. So they turned everything from a pluralistic understanding of gods that was normal in the Athenic society into a monotheistic understanding of God. So that's my understanding of this. What do you think, Kemal?
If I could sort of further complicate a little bit this issue, or bring in another sort of dimension, because I think that this issue has both a sort of a more philosophical, metaphysical but also a strong psychological aspect to it. I've become very aware of this because I am originally from the Middle East, but I have grown up and lived most of my life in Scandinavia. And in these two cultural domains, there's a very different kind of attitude towards authority. Now, you see, as long as something superhuman is just like, that there's this greatness of the universe or even some sort of a universal mind, and as long as it's just like it's there, um, and I think, for instance, very often Scandinavian people, when they go out to nature, they somehow experience something that we could call spiritual or metaphysical, the greatness, majesty, beauty of nature. But it doesn't in any way bear on their personal lives. It's just like an awareness of, there's something greater than me, but it doesn't have any, as it were, authoritative implications that it would be telling me to live in a certain way or to do a certain thing. And soon as that kind of a thing, because Stephen was referring to the prophets. I mean, these prophets, they don't just come up, they don't just come with some sort of a message of, a metaphysical message. They come also with a very pragmatic and both social and individual message of what's right and wrong, what we should be doing and what we shouldn't be doing. And it's that sense of, as it were, authority over my personal life that I think that, especially in the Nordic countries, but I think more and more in the sort of secularizing world, people find it difficult to accept. And then there are other cultural domains or areas where, on the contrary, people are always seeking to make somebody or something the authority in their lives. And they don't want to make these decisions themselves. They love to have, they are very prone to elevate even a human being, a normal human being, to someone that, you tell me what's right and wrong, and I will follow it. And I think somewhere here we have to perhaps find a solution. And one thing, if I may finally say about this matter of authority, is that to me it's very interesting that in the realm of science, we even secularized people much more readily accept authority. So, for instance, as a student, when you go to university, as long as you've accepted that, for instance, someone is a professor who really knows their stuff, so you go there, and this professor is saying things that may be counterintuitive to you, but your first reaction is not that, this is nonsense, or why should I learn this? I don't even understand it, or I don't like it, or it goes against my intuition. On the contrary, you say, okay, obviously he knows I don't, so let me try to understand why it is like this. So in the realm of science, we're willing to assume this more humble attitude and even accept things that initially are challenging to our minds. But when it comes to something metaphysical, soon as there is some sort of a message that says, do this or don't do this, this is right or that is wrong, that does not sort of harmonize with our psychological or intellectual tastes, then we are prone to say, no, I mean, like, why should there be anyone telling me what is right and wrong? So I think there is this psychological aspect to the issue of God or logos that we need to take into account. It's more than just an awareness. Yeah,
I think this question of authority is so crucially in the background of all of our conversations about this topic, especially as it is one of the major threads in Western culture and Western thought over the last few centuries. We can even perhaps trace this struggle about authority back around 400 years, let's say, to the Enlightenment, which can be thought of, it can be described in different ways, but one very compelling way that I've heard the Enlightenment described is it was a time in which we let go of this this unthinking obedience to received authority. And we're freed from that kind of tyranny of received authorities and replaced it by a reliance on the mind, a reliance on the individual's ability to work things out for themselves. And so there was a succession of authorities that, from the 1600s on, 1500s if we sort of include Copernicus and the initial this initial sort of discovery that the universe as it really is not necessarily the way it was described in the books of Ptolemy and in the ancient Greeks and so forth. So the scientific authorities were perhaps the first to fall, but then in quick succession you have this dethroning of other authority figures. The divine right of kings. Who gets to decide who's in charge, and who gets to say that you can't question the authority of the king? And this leads to all sorts of political revolutions and modern democracies. Who gets to decide what you can and can't do in matters of religion? The authority of the prophet, the authority of the church, the authority of the clergy all goes as well. And so we're left in the present day with this very pervasive feature of the Western ethos, the Western way of approaching the world, which is skepticism towards anyone who comes along and says, I'm an authority in this. But as you point out, Kamran, when it comes to everyday life, there are certain authorities that we accept, at least provisionally. As students in, studying certain subjects, we accept, at least initially, the authority of our professors, the authority of the textbooks. If we just questioned all authorities at all times, then all order would dissolve and there would be complete chaos. So what we have instead is this provisional accepting of, say, the authority of your professor, say as an undergraduate. But one way of describing this elevation, elevation isn't the right word, but once you reach to a certain point in your studies, and you graduate, and you enter the academy, the academy of your peers, in a certain academic subject, at some point you are allowed to question the masters. At some point you may be taken, you may not be taken seriously if you say you want to question the theory of relativity or something like that, but you have acquired the grounding and the foundation upon which you can now start looking at even those who are in authority and maybe propose other sorts of ideas. So if that's the case in the realm of science, in the realm of education, where we're in this cultural context in which unchallengeable authorities have all been dethroned successively, but we come back to the practical reality that there has to be some kind of authority in our world to keep the world in order. And if we have this model in the educational world of, there being authorities as you're a student, as you're moving along, but then you reach a certain point where it's possible to question those authorities, it's possible to advance other sorts of fundamental theories about things. Is there an analogy to this in the realm of Jerusalem, which is our focus for today? And what would that analogy be? If we've dethroned the power of the clergy in today's world, if we approach with great skepticism any sort of totalizing claim to truth that we tend to associate with prophets, for example, and we allow ourselves to question the possibility that these prophets are delivering absolute unchangeable truths in the spiritual realm. But then the next step is, well, pragmatically, as a matter of ordering the world, as a matter of navigating our lives personally and collectively, we look to teachers, we look to educators, we look to physicians to heal our illnesses. We're always looking to those who are farther along the path than we are to help us along, because human beings don't start from zero. we're born into a social matrix in which there are those who have already done a lot of the hard work, and it doesn't make sense to reinvent the wheel all the way down with every generation. And so it makes sense that there are established authorities that we're born into in a way. But when it comes to religion, this is the fraught question, because everyone has their own religious authority, and these religious authorities, these different clergies, these different dogmas, all seem to be saying different things about how we should live our lives. That is now sort of, which was okay in a world which was big enough to accommodate all these different groups in their own continent or in their own, you know, part of the land. But as human beings have grown to finally reach the physical limits of our planet, it's no longer possible. This old paradigm of just, well, every group has its own set of beliefs and moves on along its own trajectory. We can no longer do that pragmatically. We now have to find ways of getting together and resolving these conflicts, because we've reached the physical limits of the planet.
There is one story, one narrative from Enlightenment, or maybe even from the Platonic and the logical part that is about critiques, and always be critical. But the critique is also has a dualism, and the other the opposite of critique. What would that be? I think it's trust. And in some way or another, we have to trust in something. Mm-hmm. And what we trust in, I would say, is also our way of living. We live according to all the truths or all the what we experience as some kind of meaningfulness. And I think when we talk about trust or authority, I think we of course there will always be humans, but there will also be thoughts and even actions. And I think if we dig down, we will end up experience some kind of worldview that is expressed through our action of or way of being. So what if we are a secular person? You will also have some kind of I say we because I'm as a Norwegian, I feel myself as a secular part of the secular world. But we will there will always be some kind of worldview. Talk about the atheistic worldview, and that's a very monotheistic way of thinking, I would say. Or we could say a scientific worldview, and maybe a scientific worldview is not monotheistic. Maybe it's actually it depends on a plurality of scientific paradigms, and I think that about divinity there is also there must be a trust in some kind of authority, but the question is what kind of.
One question I would ask, sort of behind the things you said, is what does it mean to say you're an atheist versus a believer? You know, what does it mean to say I believe in God, for example? And I think the obvious, maybe the surface level answer, which most people might say, is, oh, well, you believe in the existence of a being, which may or may not be proven logically, and there are historical arguments for this being's existence, and I stand on the side of the people who assert that these arguments for that being's existence are true. That's one way of saying what it means to believe in God. I more and more question whether that's a coherent way of thinking about belief in God, because what is the difference between someone who sits in their chair and says, I assent to or believe in this proposition, and another person who sits in another chair and says, well, I don't assent to that proposition? There's no practical difference between those two people, except as it is reflected in how they live their lives, which invites us to a different sort of definition of what it means to believe in God, which may scramble our whole thinking about atheists versus believers and so forth. And that would be, we worship the thing that we spend all of our time and energy on. You know, the thing that we worship, the thing that we believe in, is actually the thing that we center all of our time and energy around. I'm proposing this as a different definition of what it means to say believe in God, because according to that definition, everyone's a believer. Some are polytheists though, because they worship money and power and sex or other things that are the gods of their own imagination. In that sense, polytheism is still a very live and active issue today. I mean, there aren't a lot of people out there worshiping Thor and worshiping Zeus and so forth. You know, that's historically in the past. But polytheism is still an active issue because people are worshiping all sorts of what one would call, from a theological perspective, you know, false gods, because these are the things that take up all of their mental space. So if we redefine worship as that, the thing that that is completely engaging you, then just about everyone on the planet is a worshiper of some kind or another. And how we evaluate it then becomes a matter of, well, what does it produce in the world? You know, what is this doing? You know, if there are atheists who are lovers of humanity and care deeply about the world, and they say, well, I don't believe in God, so we define them as atheists, but they're navigating the world in a way that is deeply informed by the suffering of others, that is deeply informed by trying to make the world a better place, not just as a sales pitch, but as a reality. Maybe those people are actually the believers in the way that really counts. And maybe conversely, the people who go around saying, I believe in God and only my God, and if you don't believe in my God, then you're subject to, you know, war or various forms of oppression to bring you around to the realization of this truth of the one true God that I believe in. Looking at the consequence of that belief, which is war and suffering and oppression, maybe that's actually the true kind of atheism, or the worshiping the false god. So in that sense, that invites us to scramble the categories in our mind, and instead of thinking of the world as divided into a bunch of believers and a bunch of disbelievers, and the believers are all fighting among themselves because they have differences of belief. Instead, if we think of the world as divided into those who are doing good in the world and those who are standing and doing nothing or are working actively to make the world a worse place, it's a different way of looking at the whole at this question.
The funny thing is that would also be like when we are back to Plato, I feel, because this is of course I think this understanding of okay, what is it all about? What trust? Okay, yeah. It is to have some kind of meaningful action, yes. to feel that what you're doing yes. has some kind of good purpose in some way.
Yes, trust, and to stand in awe of something. You know, there's a statement in the Baha'i writings that the plant prays to the sun. You know, it says, oh, it prays, you know, potentially in the way that a plant does. You know, it says, send down your light, you know, send down the rain so that I can grow. In other words, everything is a worshiper from a certain perspective. Everything believes according to its own degree. We can't confine the idea of worship or belief to the human species, but it's something which is something which sort of continuously is a feature of the world, and it has something more to do with orientation towards the thing that is the source of your being. It's not assent to a set of doctrines or dogmas, but it's an inner orientation in life that is oriented towards awe, and which translates into a kind of a reverence for the sacred, You know, we see this in a lot of the great scientists who are not theistic believers. Albert Einstein was a great example. And Nudove, you shared some great quotations from Einstein earlier this week.
I
One
could,
of the
I could,
ones that I hadn't seen before.
I could read some of them just
Yes,
to.
yes. One of them that begins, if you look at
the
this tree.
I think the
That's a great-
beginning and the end of what I sent you was very nice. The
Yes.
first, and for me, this is really Einstein listening to Logos.
Mhm.
So I think, yeah. So, and the first quotation is, "I like to experience the universe as one harmonious whole. Every cell has life. Matter too has life. It is energy solidified."
Mm.
I think that's this idea that everything has life, and that we are all. And then because the last quote is, "The soul given to each of us is moved by the same living spirit that moves the universe."
Mhm.
So this
Okay.
everything is life, and even our soul that is also part of the universe. We are part of what exists, and if we really could feel this energy around us and how we experience also what Cameron said about the nature, our understanding or our experience of being part of nature, I think that also could help us to unify everything that is in life.
Absolutely.
In universe.
Yeah.
Can I share this
Maybe-
other quote? Oh, go ahead, Kamran.
No, sorry. Go ahead. No, after you.
I'll just share this quote and then pass it back to you. One of the middle quotes from the set that you had shared was, "If we look at this tree outside whose roots search beneath the pavement for water, or a flower which sends its sweet smell to the pollinating bees, or even our own selves and the inner forces that drive us to act, we can see that we all dance to a mysterious tune, and the piper who plays this melody from an inscrutable distance, whatever name we give him, creative force or God, escapes all book knowledge."
It's lovely.
That's really beautiful.
So
It's
that's
really
so
beautiful. And it's
Yeah.
one of the
And-
thing is listening to. I think
Yes.
that's something we really should try to do more of. Listen to our soul, listen to what is existing. It's a very nice verb to to live by.
I asked one of the first things when I got my account, GPT chat, and it was, I think, GPT-4, and I asked it, "Give me the quotations from the world's religious scriptures that evoke the maximum degree of feelings of transcendence and at oneness with the universe," rough translation. It gave me this wonderful list of quotations, and the top of the list was from the Psalms: "Be silent and know that I am God."
Mhm.
So there's this idea which is found in many traditions that the way to the recognition of this thing, this transcendent thing for which there are no words, is through silence, which to me implies a kind of receptivity. You know, that we can think of God not so much as a being out there, but rather as an inner current running through things. And I like the analogy of a current, like a breeze or something like that, because it has a direction. You know, it has motion. It conveys something like a spirit or a warmth, or it conveys energy, and it has a direction. So it has those three components. So I find the analogy a very powerful one, because it also tells us about how our actions are not all the same. You know, what we do in our lives, it actually matters. And the actions that matter the most are the ones that are aligned with that inner current. And that inner current can be thought of in our personal lives and in the life of society at this time as the thing which moves in the direction of love and which moves in the direction of unity. That's the current of the universe. That's where things are trending. And we look into the hearts of stars, and we look into the innermost grains of the rocks around us, and they all tell that story, that the cosmos is evolving from the simple to the complex. And that evolution from the simple to the complex unlocks greater degrees of consciousness. And that, in a way, tells us logically why love is a great thing. Maybe some things don't need to be explained or rationalized because they're their own rationale. And maybe love is one of those things. But I'd like to think that love also has a deeper rationale, and that is that following that inner current and opening ourselves to love for others and for the universe and for our environment brings us into closer association. And bringing things into closer association is how higher degrees of consciousness are unlocked. It gets very metaphysical, I suppose, but for me, that's a kind of, it provides a kind of arrow, a directionality of things that otherwise one would be searching for it. One would maybe looking for, well, I want to find some authority to tell me what to do, a set of rules that I can follow, and I'll just do that. Just tell me what to do and I'll do it. So identify the authority that I believe in, and then follow the rules. And maybe that's what many people want and need. Others want to feel like there's some deeper justification and deeper logic for what they're doing and why they're doing it. And this, I think, idea of this inner current that trends towards consciousness gives a kind of moral axis to the universe that otherwise might not be there.
I think I understand what you said, but one thing I don't really understand is this about complexity. Just one more quote from Einstein. He says that the basic laws of the universe are simple, but because our senses are limited, we can't grasp them. There is a pattern in creation. So maybe we some of the patterns we might grasp, but the more simple something is, it seems the more difficult actually to grasp.
Yes.
So
excuse me, could I just insert here something that to me has to do both with the connection of Athens and Jerusalem and with the educational world. And I think it relates to what we've been just discussing, because if I've understood it correctly, I think the ancient Greeks had this concept of, I think they called it homology, the idea that there are certain principles that manifest themselves at all levels of existence. And so maybe we could say that there is an outer universe, and we see certain sort of principles operating in that physical universe. There's also an inner universe that follows similar kind of principles. And so on that basis, within our educational efforts, instead of trying to separate these things, separate rationality from existential issues, we could bring them together and help human beings and help young people to see how their understanding of science and their understanding of the outer universe can help them also to understand their inner universe. Because I think what you were saying, Stephen, about the current is very much like I was thinking of like they're sort of like inner points of gravity. Our lives gravitate towards different things, and so all of these things that we have in physics, we can even how atoms come together to form molecules. It's as you were saying, it's a form of love, isn't it? So and unity and harmony. So we can see that, and I think this is why perhaps in all sacred writings, analogies have been used, and they have been very clarifying, because there is that essential unity between outer and inner universes.
Yes. Rumi said,
I think this is something we could build more on.
Absolutely, yeah. There's a poem by Rumi, or a fragment of a poem by Rumi. It says, "Dost thou consider thyself a puny form when within thee the universe is folded?" This is one of the most ancient ideas, that there is this deep correspondence between the inner and the outer. Another one of a quotation from the Quran of Islam says, "We will show them our signs on the horizons and within their own selves." That these signs of the divine are found sort of equally out there and within, which connects so beautifully to the two principal ways of conceiving of the divine. Throughout religious history, in the West, it's been more seeing God out there, so to speak, the transcendent God, whereas to put it a little bit too generally, whereas the Eastern traditions tend to see the God more immanently, more as the God within, the God that is reflected as that divine spark that is within. But the inner and the outer are correlated to each other. And the ancient Greeks believed this. It's one of the ancient Hermetic tablets begins with this statement that whatever is above is like that which is below. Whatever is below is like that which is above, and that this is a kind of miraculous thing. It enables us to perform miracles, understanding that homology, understanding that correspondence between inner and outer. And I think that's one of the very deepest threads in the history of thought, is this idea of the divine not being something that can be captured within any single framework. Thinking of God out there has its truth, but it's complemented by something which on the face of it seems like the opposite, which is the reality of the divine spark within. It was Niels Bohr, I think, in the context of quantum physics, who said that that superficial truths are ones whose opposite are falsehoods, but the deepest truths are those whose opposites are equally true. And I think that goes for these sorts of theological topics even more. Whether God is out there or God is within, these are sort of poles of a sphere that depending on your perspective, you may see it from one way or see it from the other way, but really it's, they're both equally true. Whether we see God as something supernatural or whether we see God acting in and through the natural world is another kind of polarity, which is similar but not identical to this polarity of the inner and the outer. Another one is whether we see God as one or we see God as many, or whether we see God as beyond one and many entirely. These seem like completely, it has to be one or the other, right? If you lay these down on a table, you have to be able to pick up one and say this one is right and the others are wrong. But when it comes to as Niels Bohr says, when it comes to these deepest truths, you can't trust your intuition of logic, of Aristotle's law of the excluded middle, which is that a statement is either true or not true, but it can't be both and it can't be neither. And this law of the excluded middle, this law of logic, which runs through so much of Western style thinking, is completely blown up by these metaphysical / theological realities, and also the realities of deeper realities of the physical world as well, in which the law of the excluded middle does not apply. This, it's equally true to think about God as out there as well as God within. It's equally true to think about God as supernatural, transcendent, as well as acting in and through the material world. It's equally true to think about God as sort of manifested in many different forms as well as manifested in a single monotheistic conception. And when we understand that, it unlocks a degree of human unity that was not possible before. Because before, we are loggerheads and we cannot agree about basic things which we think divide us. These chasms between worldviews that divide us. If we can approach them from this perspective of, well, it's kind of a sphere and there are poles on opposite, they're ideas on opposite poles, but it's all connected by the meridian lines that make it into this single sphere. then it provides, I think, a possibility for bridging otherwise unbridgeable cultural and religious divides in the world.
So, based on what we are saying now, if we had the possibility of changing religious study in school, how would we see the subject? How should we turn it from different religious belief into a question on if people are good or not?
We somehow have to detach and decouple our idea of religion from the idea of dogma. For so many people, religion equals dogma. You know, you have to believe in the Nicene Creed. You have to believe in, you know, these utterances of my prophet. And if you're not, then you're irreligious. Then you've turned away from the truth. But if we abstract religion from the dogmatic formulations that get attached to it, that end up obscuring the light, there's a beautiful play that I was in as a child called The Lamp, and which is the story of this light that was brought into the world, which people were amazed by and reverenced. And so they wanted to do honor to this light. So they built this lamp around the light, you know, to protect it and to give glory to it. And each successive generation added more stuff to that lamp until it became entirely covered over in gold plate and beautiful ornamentation and jewels and so forth, until after a few generations, you couldn't see the light. All you could see was the structure of the lamp, which was there initially as a protection for the light, as a way to highlight and, you know, that light, that flame. But then, of course, at the end of the play, someone comes along, you know, removes the cover, and you realized all along that what people thought was the light was actually just this human accretion of ideas, of dogmas, of things that now, oh, you have to believe this, otherwise it's not true. You have to believe that someone can be raised from the dead after 3 days. Otherwise, you know, that is the absolute fundamental. Otherwise, you cannot be accounted a true follower of this faith.
So maybe everybody could play this play and make this play in school. But what do you think, Cameron?
I think that sort of one implication of this beautiful play is that you know, for some reason, both in society at large and at school, when we are dealing with matters that have to do with not only religion but most sort of, I would say, social phenomena, we often try to highlight differences and to establish various sort of varying identities. You know, how is the West different from the East? How is this country different from that country? How is this culture or language different, and so forth? And so in this kind of analytical comparative perspective, we lose sight of the fundamental underlying unities between things. And I think this is something that we should I think what we were discussing earlier on also, you know, realizing the underlying oneness and unity of existence at all levels, then I think we should, you know, in the study of religions also try to find that essential, those essential points of unity, because there are many, and those who have been seeking those have found lots of them. And I think if we took that kind of an approach, then we would find that actually these dogmatic differences, even though sometimes they seem very fundamental, are secondary, and it's possible to find a unifying approach that all humans can ascribe to, whatever background, you know, whatever belief background they come from.
I think that's also why I often, because there's many people talking about complexities, and I sometimes wonder if I think we should try to focus a little bit more about what is actually essential. What is the most meaningful or the most of value. What should we take care of? What should we trust in? Instead of thinking that everything is so complex and everything is different and everything is. Also in the religious study, I think there's too much focus on what is the difference between all the religions and not what actually are similar.
It's such a hot button topic in the United States, and I can see it from both sides. On the one hand, there is a legitimate need to acknowledge that which has historically been unacknowledged. There's a legitimate need to affirm the identities of groups which historically have not had those identities confirmed. At the same time, in the very long run, I imagine that an emphasis more on the unifying things behind cultures, behind religions, behind the various tribes of humanity is ultimately the right thing to focus on. But it's such a complicated thing, and maybe in the midterm, we need to look at, appreciate, celebrate, highlight, affirm those differences. It looks like, and that can be taken to an extreme with the kind of identity in politics that have become so polarizing in the United States. And to stand on the other side of that and say, oh, we should just look at how we're all one behind that, can be mistaken as going over to the other side. You know, it can be mistaken as moving counter to those progressive forces which seem to be moving more in the direction of highlighting and acknowledging and affirming identity in a kind of in various tribal senses. And maybe it's possible to see this as a stage in a path, you know, that in this initial stage in the path towards a broader and deeper kind of unity, which is not a unity in uniformity, but a unity that recognizes and acknowledges and celebrates diversity. We first have to identify what that diversity is and be clear on what it is, and be clear that it's all accepted, and to have a very inclusive stance about different life paths. And then having done that, we can then find and focus on that unity behind it. I don't know. It's such a complicated and fraught social question today.
It is. One of the biggest problem that, in my view, one of the biggest problem in this we should all understand each other is when I feel that somebody is being too dogmatic and actually have thoughts that is, I would say, violent towards Earth or towards humanity, and then I can't accept it. And the thing is that we have to differ between what is the origin of something and what is the value or the validity of a statement, or an action. So we have to, and we I think the originality or the origin of something we should never discuss. I think that will always be something we should tolerate and accept, but we shouldn't always accept claims, statements, and actions. That is something we should. I think we have to actually prevent some of them. Cameron.
Yeah, but I mean, I agree with you, but I think that, you know, when it comes to this matter of unity and diversity, I think I don't know. It may be that because I'm one of those so-called third culture kids, you know, a person who has grown up in multiple cultural settings. It comes quite sort of natural to you to realize that different cultures and different groups of people with different identities have developed different aspects of our common humanity. And actually, you know, Dante Alighieri, I find this extremely beautiful. His explanation of why there are so many people in the world and they're so different, he said it's because because the human potential is something so great that no one human being can manifest it all. And that's why God has created so many human beings. And so each human being can manifest some aspects of our common humanity. And in that sense, of course, we are sort of like mirrors to each other, that we can find further aspects of our own humanity in our fellow human beings. And I think if you look at it in that way, then I think diversity becomes actually a unifying factor, and we find that these different aspects are all aspects of our common humanity, and that we can learn more about that humanity, which is something extremely great and deep and multifaceted, by acknowledging the areas within which different people with different identities have developed, something along those lines.
Yeah, I even experience that if we really should take care of plurality, we need to really discuss, or to keep a logical discussion alive, intersubjective discussion alive on these abstract questions that we are questioning in Athens and Jerusalem. I think that's extremely important. If we lose sight of all these abstract discussions, then all plurality will just be blurring. It will fade in non-direction. It would just be one. I think Hannah Arendt, she says something about this, that if we remove the difference between truth and false, we also remove the possibility of plurality. Then we end up in totalitarianism, actually.
Yeah, I think that's a good note for continuing next time, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that was a wonderful conclusion to all of this.
So we should say thank you. Maybe the listener have some ideas on how we should change the religion study based on our conversation or on thoughts you have. So don't be shy to, if you have something to comment on the podcast, just write on our webpage. So thanks for listening.
Great.
You have been listening to Athens and Jerusalem, created by Cameron Namdar, Stephen Phelps, and Knut Ove Essay. Nora Juel is the broadcast voice and technical support. Music is pieces of Edvard Grieg's Morning Mood. The voices in the intro are Viktor Frankl, interview with Robert Oppenheimer, and Pope John Paul II. Thank you for listening, and please check out another episode.